objects in the skies that we don't know exactly what they are.
We just have to face the fact that maybe we're not alone in the universe, which hurts our ego a little bit.
And the Senate wants answers.
Anything that enters an airspace that's not supposed to be there is a threat.
My name is Brian Bender, and this is my abduction story. I call it my abduction story because sometimes I felt like I was getting sucked into this UFO enthusiast world. Here is your guide to understanding what's going on with the Pentagon and UFOs. Politico started delving into the UFO issue when we reported one of the first stories about the existence of a Pentagon UFO research office. It's not just they have an office that's looking into this, but there's some real experiences that our pilots are reporting that are getting at least some attention in the Pentagon. What I came to understand was that even within the military, there was a reluctance to look into these things because I think military personnel have been concerned about being labeled, tinfoil hat wearing kooks if they start talking about UFOs. But clearly, there were enough reports that they really couldn't ignore it. Since the UFO task force became news in 2017, more politicians are more comfortable than ever talking about unknown objects in the sky.
We have lots of reports about what we call unidentified aerial phenomenon.
Let's take a quick look back at how this all happened. In 1952, the U.S. Air Force launched Project Blue Book to look into UFO sightings, but you'll hear more about that later on. Fast forward to 2008, the Pentagon's secret UFO office known as ATIP was established. It wasn't until 2017 when footage of Navy pilots witnessing UFOs leaked and the existence of the Pentagon UFO office became known that the story really started to get interesting. By 2019, members of Congress were receiving classified briefings about UFOs. In 2020, the Senate Intelligence Committee, led by Senator Marco Rubio, decides they want to request a government report on UFOs. A public report that not only pulls together what the government might know about UFOs, but more importantly, what they're doing to get to the bottom of these mysteries. When the Advanced Aerial Threat Identification Program was created at the Pentagon, it was given a fairly innocuous-sounding military name. That way, there was no reference to UFOs. In the summer of 2017, my reporting uncovered that this office had existed. They'd been given a significant amount of resources, and so I started digging to find out the origins of the office, also where all that money was spent. And it was former Senate Majority Leader Reid who secured $22 million to establish the UFO's ATIP program. Next on our journey, we talked to some politicians themselves. Good morning, Senator Reid. How are you?
I'm doing fine. I was the first to get involved in this. And much to the consternation of my staff, they told me, stay the hell away from this. It's not anything that's going to help you.
So at the time, it sounds like your political advisors thought that this could be damaging politically. In other words, if you're associated with this, people will think Reid has lost it.
It's not just a bunch of weirdos that are thinking about this. I think it's people who are really curious. The more time we spend on this, the more people are beginning to understand.
Are you hopeful that some of these very secretive agencies will be willing to share more of what they're seeing, what they're gathering?
What we have to do is understand that there are different levels of transparency. I think the administration has an obligation to make sure that what information they have that is important to the security of our country, that they make sure members of Congress know what's going on.
One of the biggest challenges, not the biggest challenge in this subject is, and this is true of any subject, but when it comes to UFOs, it's kind of on steroids, and that is separating fact from fiction, from fantasy, from theories, because there's a million theories and lots of different perspectives on what these things could be or not be.
Something strange happened in the skies over Arizona that still hasn't been fully explained.
Fife Simington was one of thousands who witnessed one of the most famous UFO sightings in recent history. He was also governor of Arizona at the time, making him probably the highest public official to ever report a UFO. I met with him at the Arizona Historical Society, where there was a new exhibit to the Phoenix Lights. So take us back, 1997, you're governor of Arizona. You were on your way home from the governor's office, right?
Yes, and I've been listening to the news. There have been some sightings, and I said, I'm going to go take the car. and I'm going to try to get to the high ground and take a look and see if I can see these Phoenix lights that everybody's talking about. I was being a truant. I was slipped my detail. I drove my car down and crossed the 51 and went up into this little park, and there were a whole bunch of people. It was really dark, a whole bunch of people standing around, and I just sort of very quietly moved in and turned and looked to the west, which is where the bright lights were. And then somebody in the crowd said, "Oh my gosh, look at that!" And so I pivoted and turned, and there it was. It was coming right over us. You know, Squaw Peak in the background. It was really majestic. The thing that really was extraordinary was there was absolutely no sound at all, no noise. I mean, and everybody was quiet, and it just passed over, and no jet engine noise, nothing.
So as a pilot yourself, unlike anything...
Never seen anything like it.
Or
Never.
imagined.
No. I keep telling my friends that nothing will really ever be settled until whoever they are decide to land on the White House lawn and get down and say we've come in peace.
So we know the government has studied UFOs and the phenomenon for decades, but the last known public investigation was a long, long time ago, nearly 50 years ago when Project Blue Book wrapped up. Since then, as far as we know, the only public effort has been ATIP, the project that was started by Harry Reid. I should mention that these days I'm based most of the time in Arizona, which is the perfect backdrop if you're covering UFOs, because there's lots of history of sightings in the southwest of America. The next step in our guide is to meet the true believers, and you start to see it's not your typical tinfoil hat wearing fanatics, at least not always. Two of my guides into this world of UFOs have been Karen Berard, who runs the UFO Congress, which is an annual gathering of all sorts of academics, scientists, average citizens who want to know the answers, as well as Alejandro Rojas, who is a journalist, tech writer, who spent many years unpacking fact from fiction in the world of UFOs.
So who is supposed to put this together and release it?
Well, the congressional language is pretty clear. The Director of National Intelligence has to publish a public report by June. And the language is pretty specific.
But there's no way to know whether they're going to be telling the truth or not.
Well, I mean,
I don't think they're gonna lie.
I don't think they're going to make stuff up.
Yeah.
But
They might not.
they might,
keep stuff secret.
Yeah.
they
Like,
might
we don't
not
know.
include a lot of things.
Right.
Right.
I'm most interested, I guess, in what the Navy will say, because they're the most vested in the whole thing. I mean, it's their fault this has even gotten to this point. So what are they going to say?
I think the government has created a lot of their own problem when it comes to this topic. I don't subscribe to the majority of the conspiratorial ideas, and that's due to research.
After the close of Project Blue Book, there was a memo that came out where one of the generals said, that's okay, we didn't need Blue Book anyway. All of the cases that have, are a concern for national security go elsewhere. This data goes into these tiny little pockets here and there. And so hopefully that will be the result. We'll see in this report that they'll be combining.
The question is, okay, once they centralize the information, the government centralizes it, will they share it with the academics, with the scientists outside the government that might be able to make sense of it?
Right, because the government isn't a scientific place, but if they can give, some of the professors some information, maybe they would have to get clearance first in order for them to start working on it. But at least that's a start.
Finally, the last stop on this guide is a former government UFO expert. These sightings and government research isn't just contained in the United States, of course. Nick Pope has become one of the most credible and well-known researchers on the issue of UFOs. He worked for many years studying the issue for the British Ministry of Defense, and I met up with him at his house in Tucson, Arizona.
The second and critical question is, do UAPs represent a possible threat to the defense of the realm? We could argue never shown hostile intent. However, Russian aircraft attempting to penetrate the UK air defence region in the Cold War never showed hostile intent, but they certainly represented a threat. Thus, the only,
just if you show up and you don't do anything doesn't mean that you're not necessarily...
And this is it in a nutshell. Thus, the only logical conclusion that we can come to is that we do not know if UAPs represent a threat to the defence of the realm. And this is defence intelligence, science and technology.
I was a career civil servant in the British government
in the Ministry of Defence, so the UK equivalent of the DoD in the States, I was given a job where my duties included researching and investigating the UFO phenomenon to assess any defence implications. I came in really with no baggage, no kind of preconceived notions, really an open mind, and I tried to take a data-led approach.
Do you have any sort of guideposts to figure out, okay, what is credible data?
There are a lot of well-meaning people who see UFOs who just misidentify things, of course. I mean, that's actually the majority of sightings by a clear margin. We dropped UFO and substituted in UAP. And this was something that we did in the Ministry of Defence in the 90s. Now, we didn't invent the term, but we adopted it precisely because we wanted to get within the Ministry of Defence stakeholder engagement. If you go in and say, boss, I'd like some funding for UFOs, no way. If it's like, well, we've got some things going on in our airspace and we want to do a study into unidentified aerial phenomena, it reframes it as maybe a science problem, a defense, national security issue.
Having covered the Pentagon and the military for a long time, I was familiar a little bit with the history of the military looking into these unexplained sightings. From what I've been reporting, very senior people in the US government who have the security clearances you would think that would allow them to know about these secret programs, they claim they don't know about them. One of the things we've tried to do in our reporting is focusing on what the government is doing about them. So what kind of taxpayer dollars is being spent to research these things? What agencies are involved? That leads us to this public report. And I think Congress's intent there is to try and force the government to be a little more organized about it. Because there's all these reports and all of these theories, conspiracy theories about what the government knows and what it might be hiding. Usually the government has the answers. Somebody does. They know where the document is, they know what the enemy is doing, or at least they have a good sense of it. This is like that rare instance where even people who are supposed to know are like, I have no idea.